Hi, I'm Sierra from The Written Library and welcome to my channel. On this channel, I like to talk about books, diving into magical worlds while creating our own. If you are interested in those things, continue on into the video. This video is all about audiobooks. Do they count as reading or not? There's a bit of a divide within the reading community. So BookTube, Bookstagram, there is some divide when it comes to audiobooks. Do they actually count as reading or not? There are people who are complete diehards to say that audiobooks do not count as reading whatsoever. That has nothing to do with actually reading. While there are those, like myself, that honestly believe that audiobooks do count as reading. But first, we're going to dive into a little bit of history of audiobooks. So doing my research, I found that audiobooks started about in 1932 by the American Foundation for the Blind in the Library of Congress. And these were vinyl records, about 15 minutes of speech, and these were created for those who are blind or visually impaired. But audiobooks didn't really take off until about the 1960s when the audio cassette tape was introduced. And that's when, for us 90s babies, this is when we were always listening to music on the cassette tapes in the car with our parents, or even just the adults in general at that time were always just popping them in if they were listening to a book, maybe like a podcast, before they were podcasts, maybe like discussion tapes, church tapes, you had stuff that was pre-recorded by your pastor, that they were shared, any type of media that could have been on the cassette tape. That was when it was mostly used, like in the car, maybe in a Walkman, on the CD. Eventually, that's how it kind of developed into these other different types of technologies, all the way to like an iPad or iPod Nano, those kind of devices. So that's just kind of like what encompasses with leading into the audiobooks. So coming into today's standards, there's a plethora of audiobook apps. And just to name a few of them, I'm just going to start off with like Audible. Spotify has books now. There's Kobo Book, Hoopla, Libby, Script, which is interesting because I used to get my Latin homework from Script. That's so interesting. Chirp Audiobooks. Never heard of that one. Kindle, Everend, and those are just some. There's always going to be different lists all over the internet of the top audiobook apps. Some have like pros and cons for each one, but there's so many options when it comes to having audiobooks. Even with having all of these different platforms, can we say that audiobooks count as reading? And to a lot of people that I've come in contact with, or just even seen on social media, they count audiobooks as reading. There are some obviously that don't count it as reading, but there's actually evidence of audiobooks having a huge impact as much as reading does. And by reading, I mean by physically reading, by having the book, open, reading the words, like these bad boys up here, that type of thing. One of my favorite things about psychology is that everything that we argue about is going to be actually studied. Like there's actually going to be someone to research it and actually put this into practice to see if it's true or false, or at least has some type of impact in our day-to-day lives. And Beth Rogalski, she did just that. She had a group listen to sections of a book called Unbroken, and then a second group read the same parts on an e-reader, and a third group read and listened at the same time. This was in 2016, and she found that there was no significant differences in comprehension between reading, listening, or reading and listening simultaneously. So that's to say that audiobooks do count as reading because our brains still process the information and we still have an understanding of what we're reading or what we're listening to the exact same way. The article goes on to talk about how Rogalski used e-readers instead of traditional books. So there might be some information that can be a little bit construed differently. It's not completely accurate, but from my personal experience, audiobooks are literally, they count as reading for me. It's the exact same thing as me reading one of these physical books as it is as listening to Audible. I get the exact same information. My brain processes everything the exact same way as I would with the book. Just as much as I visually see the characters in these books, I can see them, I can see the places, I can see the detail. I feel like it's playing out as a movie in my head. The same thing it is for the Audible for me. What helps me even more on Audible is hearing the voices. I can actually hear like, oh, that's kind of what the character kind of really would sound like if it wasn't in my voice, you know. For the last segment of this video, I'm just gonna give out 4 recommendations of books that I believe truly are fantastic as audiobooks. And the first one is Untamed by Glennon Doyle, because it is she is reading her own book. She is telling her own story. So I feel like with audiobooks, especially for those who are writing nonfiction, they're writing a memoir, this is also a great time to use your own voice into your own story. And I feel like that adds just even more of another layer of depth and connection and honesty, authenticity, and just vulnerability to your story. So I feel like audiobooks which really encompasses all of that when it comes to memoirs, especially for that. Another book is One of Us Knows by Alyssa Cole. I feel like this one definitely, I loved it as an audiobook. I feel like it was much better as an audiobook if I tried to read it than if I would try to read it physically, because the main character does have DID, and physically reading it, I could already tell just by the beginning of listening to it, I would have had the difficulty of knowing who was talking, because I wouldn't have been able to know anyone's tone of voice. But listening to it, I know which character is talking, which character is taking over at the time, what's going on in the headmate's house, and just knowing what each of them kind of look like and hearing their different voices, I can really see like a whole like cast ensemble of what's going on in the entire story. And I feel like that really was extremely helpful for that, just because the character's mental illness, it just would have been too difficult to read on my own. I feel like that would have just been too complicated. Another one, I would say all of Alexandria House's books are freaking amazing, especially when Jacoby DM voices them. Freaking love them. But I recommend Let Me Hold You. I mean, all of them are fantastic, but his voice is so good. Oh, so good. I absolutely just love hearing his voice in like the timbre of the male character and just in certain situations. I'm not gonna give out any details, but if you know, you know. And last one is Beasts of War by Ayana Gray. I listened to all 3 books on Audible, but I also physically read 2 of them. I didn't physically read Beasts of War, but I'm here to tell you, listening to them on audiobooks is just as good as physically reading them. Just the detail, I could see the characters, I could see the creatures in the world, and it just helped to hear just like the tremble in the characters' voices, like when they're scared or when they're, you know, they're obviously like very upset. Like hearing it is like, oh yeah, this is kind of a tough situation to kind of be in, or just like, yeah, this is scary. So it really kind of heightens it up even more with reading books such as like fantasy like that. And for me, mythology, because I'm leaning more into mythology tied into fantasy, I feel like that really kind of like made a movie in my head. And so now I'm like, I really am pushing. Like I really would love the entire Beasts of Prey trilogy to be made into movies, because I can see it. Just by reading it and listening to it, I can see everything like come to life, and I want to see it on screen so bad, and it needs to be done perfectly. But that's just my opinion on that. Well, that's the end of the video. So this just leads up to the question of, do audiobooks count as reading for you, the viewers? If so, yes or no, you can add them in the comments below. Until next time, bye.